All right, let's do this. Hey everyone, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. Know we have a pretty global audience today. Thank you for tuning in for our second webinar of the year with Tim, who's our head of data at Statsig, and Allon, who's the CEO and founder of Bell Statistics. So this is going to be a pretty interesting webinar today, and we have a bunch of topics that we've prepared. What we think are common mistakes people make in experimentation. This is based on both what Tim and Alon have seen in their rich experience. I'll have them quickly introduce themselves before we get started as folks trickle in. But one thing that I'd love for people to do is use the chat option and let us know where you're from. Hopefully, it's enabled now and everyone can, drop in, the city and country or state that you're from. So Tim and I are joining from Seattle, Washington. Alon is, of course, joining from Tel Aviv, Israel. And I already see a few people joining in from typing in their responses. We have Tel Aviv, San Jose, Boulder, Colorado, Berlin, quite a few more folks from Tel Aviv, um, Houston, London, Minneapolis, Singapore. Oh wow, that's like a pretty big geography. Warsaw, Poland, Italy. Nice. This is
We're
awesome.
global. We got almost every
Truly.
continent.
Oh, Hyderabad, India as well, my home country. That's awesome. Like it's literally like, almost covering the entire globe, I guess. Well, thank you for joining in, everyone. We have a few hot topics, hotly debated topics that we're going to discuss today. But before we get started, I want to just quickly hand it over to you alone first. Quick intro. Tell us a bit about yourself and your company, and then we'll do 10.
Thanks, Sid. Happy to be here. My name is Allon. I'm CEO of Bell Statistics. We do advanced analytics services, mostly A/B testing, MMM, and geo experiments, working mostly in Israel with companies like Monday.com, Playtika, Honeybook, and more. And happy to be here and see so many people from all across the globe.
Yep, experimentation brings the world together, I guess. Uh, and Tim, Tim is our head of data at Statsig. Tim, do you want to just give a quick intro about your role here?
Sure. I lead the data team here. I've been here since the start of the company, so I've seen our experimentation and stats engine evolve. But we basically work on these helping to build experimentation solutions for our customers' complex or even standard use cases. I have found that it's very important to understand our customers' organizational structure, but also their statistical challenges, and we work with them closely to make sure our platform works.
Nice. Yeah, I think both Tim and Alone have just such rich experience, like partnering very closely with customers from different industries. And so I think, today we've curated a list of questions that, they've seen, they get asked pretty often. So we thought, we'll use this opportunity to sort of, um, you know, clear the air around these topics. So what we'll do is we'll first, for the first 20 to 25 minutes, we'll go over some of the prepared questions that we have on topics ranging from interaction effects to sample sizes to holdouts. And then I want to use the remaining, 15 to 20 minutes of the webinar to take your questions live. I remember the last time we did this, we had a ton of participation. So hopefully, you have brought your questions today for our speakers. And you can use the chat or Q&A option to drop these questions throughout the webinar, and we'll set aside time at the end to answer them live. Okay, to get started, Tim, a common concern folks have is on experiments interacting with each other. Now, obviously, a lot of our customers at Statsig are running hundreds of concurrent experiments, so I'm sure you've, dealt with this quite a bit. So is this worry legitimate? And what's your advice here when people come and ask you about interaction effects?
I think so this is a common concern, especially for folks who are starting to ramp up experimentation. And I think it comes from a scientific habit that you want to control as many variables as possible. But the issue is that whether a user clicks on a button or not is dependent on a multitude of different factors. For example, like what is their gender, age, what device are they using, what do they have for breakfast that morning, what website they just visit. Like there's a lot of things that play into that, even like what is their favorite color. Um, But so if you think about that, there's virtually an infinite number of factors that affect what a user does on your website. Controlling for like whether they saw two or three other experiments is really just a drop in the ocean here. Unfortunately, when people worry too much about controlling for these factors, it means that you start isolating or staggering experiments. You make sure experiments stay away from each other, or you carve up your user base that only like 50% of users see this experiment, another 50% see this one. Um, this is actually pretty toxic because it slows down your rate of experimentation, cuts your statistical power down, um, and really hinders your team's ability to be able to try new things and learn.
Yeah. Alon, do you have anything to add to what Tim said?
Well, I think he said it really, really nice and straight to the point. Well, basically, I think the concern is valid. So, like in theory, the experiments could interact in some way and lead to bad conclusion. But I also think it is very much exaggerated. First, because most of the experiments, as we know, they don't move the needle, like the test itself does not. So it's hard to believe that maybe the interaction effect will happen. So this is one thing. And the other is that there are many articles that were published by big companies, Microsoft, for an example, that showed that there aren't that many interaction effects. So it's in theory, it's something that you should consider, or it could happen, but in practice, it rarely happens. I didn't encounter that while I was working at Wix, only once or twice. And I don't think I think one of my clients had it also. Um, and you need to, like, on the other hand, there's a missing opportunity when you don't do experiments concurrently, if you don't run them at the same time. It's slower the pace, and I think it's a big failure for a company, like for the statistician in the company, uh, if you have experiments waiting in queue uh, till the experiment is being the one that is live in production is being until it is done. So I think you should really run a concurrent experiment, and you can check and verify that the risk that you are not harming the validity of each one of them.
Got it. So it sounds like we almost make like that trade-off of, wanting to optimize for experiment velocity rather than like worrying too much about um, the interaction, potential interaction effects. On that note, on just like, testing velocity and running a lot of experiments, running concurrent experiments, sometimes we get this question and people think that a change is too small, or an idea is not worth testing in the first place. So they may say things like, oh, this change is a part of our strategy, or like, oh, we don't really need to test this. So is that thinking justified? Do you think that that's a mistake Alon?
Yeah, well, I actually get it pretty often, and I think there are many reasons to why people say that. They want to move fast. They don't want to have, I don't know, bad result from the A/B test that might make them reconsider releasing the feature or not. So, like, I can understand why people say that, and I can understand the state of mind. But I think that in general, everything is worth testing for the mere chance that maybe there's a bug, maybe something is not working right, and maybe sometimes we are, we anticipate to see some kind of lift, or maybe we anticipate not to see any change or any lift, but it happens because that's why we do experimentation. This is the whole idea of experimentation. We want to validate our hypothesis and our ideas because often we are wrong, or our intuition is wrong. So in general, I think that the state of mind should be, if we could test it, let's do it. Maybe even if we don't think that we're going to see any effect, we could do a non-inferiority experiment. That could be like a do no harm test. So you could do that if you really don't wanna, if you don't think that you're going to move the needle. But we should aspire to see some kind of improvement, and we should aspire to test everything just for the mere chance that we are doing some kind of a harm, unintended harm.
Got it. And Tim, I'm sure you have some perspectives here to you formerly worked, of course, for many years at Meta, which is known to like, ship every change as a test essentially. So, what are your perspectives here on whether changes are whether you should be testing every change versus like, some small changes can be neglected?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in testing every single change. I think there's a lot of things you can see or even unexpected things you can find when doing these when putting them behind an A/B test. I usually find that folks who are questioning why we should be testing everything is the pushback usually comes from the fact that running experiments can be costly for some companies. This involves like a lot of like overhead, a lot of time, a lot of effort for the team, especially if they don't have that muscle for running experiments routinely. And I think that's actually why it's really critical where if you are driving an experimentation program, you should be looking at how to reduce friction and make it trivial how to set up, make it trivial for an engineer to set up an experiment. I'll give an example. When I was at Meta, there was an intern who was working on fixing a bug. There was like a bug report from a customer. The intern went and found that, hey, there's a typo in the code. And so this was like a no-brainer, like, hey, we should just fix the typo. This
Yeah.
is this is an obvious thing, 100% guaranteed this is going to be better for the user. And so he asked me, should I set this up as an experiment? And I was actually tempted to say no, but I thought about it and I said, well, why not? I said, how hard is it for you to set up an experiment? He said, it's not hard. There's like a UI that Facebook had internally where within a couple of clicks and filling out a couple of fields, like the experiment would be up and running. And so I said, like, well, why not just go for it? So they did it and they came back 2 days later with the results. And this, keep in mind, this is an intern, so he didn't know how to read the results. And he said, like, these are my results. Does it look like I fixed the bug? And I looked at it and I'm like, yeah, I can see clearly users were able to go from page A to page B now properly. They weren't able to before. But what was interesting was we're now finding an error on page B affecting their usage. And and it was like a minus like 5% effect. Um,
Ooh.
and I remember thinking, wow, we wouldn't, if we didn't run this as an A/B test, this very simple change, we would not have found that. And we would have had to wait probably like 9 months for a customer to report this as a bug. Like the fact we had run this test, we were able to actually see something which we would not have been able to see without it. So now after that, I've become a big believer of just test everything as long as it's really easy to run tests.
That's an
That's
awesome
a great
story.
story, actually, Tim. Sid, if that okay, I'll give you another example I have
Uh-huh.
from a client which I think could also relate to the topic. They had a new feature actually. They just added like ability to the product, and they were sure that they want to release that feature. It was the competitor had it. It was part of the strategy. The consumer they asked for it, so they actually wrote in support. They asked for that feature to be released, but so it was clear to everyone that this feature should be released, but they did um, um, they did release it at a test, an A/B test before, and they had significant negative results for the revenue, which shouldn't be related to anything because it was just adding a new feature. It shouldn't have any relationship with the revenue. Anyway, when something like that happens, usually you start blaming, not like really blaming, but you look at this software engineers. Maybe something is wrong with there's some kind of a bug, something is not working right. They did all the checks and they saw that everything was fine. Then usually you go to the analyst to see maybe something in the analysis was not proper. Maybe there was some kind of a problem with I don't know, with the SQL query if they are not using an A/B testing tool, and they were not. And they found out that everything was fine. Then they spoke with the user to understand, and they found out that the feature, people were so obsessed with that feature, which they really liked, and they made them not convert from freemium to premium users. So that I think it was, and they did, eventually they did release the feature, but not in the same way that they thought they would do before, prior to that specific test. So they changed the way, they changed the place and the time that their customer, their user were exposed to that new feature, so it won't bring down significant negative loss in revenue.
Wow, I love these examples. And I mean, I think the common thread seems to be almost, you got like Tim, you mentioned like reducing the friction to like running the test. And if it's so easy to like just ship every change as a test anyway, like then I guess it makes it, uh, I mean, you probably end up discovering a lot of these things that you wouldn't have even thought about otherwise. So lo love both your examples, Alon and Tim, sort of driving home this point. Um, okay, so just, continuing this thread of just, people coming up with reasons or why they shouldn't run experiments. One thing that people say, and this may be more true for smaller companies, is that they say that, oh, we don't have enough users to run a test. And I know, Tim, you had a sort of viral meme that you posted a couple of weeks ago where you said you don't need 1 million users to run a test. Changed my mind. So do you want to talk through that next? Just on like, big tech companies obviously have, Meta and the like have like millions of users. So um, yeah, what's your take on not
Yeah.
having enough users to run a test?
Yeah, I think if you haven't been used to running experiments and seeing that it can work on a smaller user base, you're sort of your view of experimentation is tainted by what the big companies have told you. For example, like Google had this famous 50 Shades of Blue experiment where they tried 50 different shades of blue and see which one was able to marginally increase the click-through rate on links. And that for Google was a fractional percentage of a lift, but it was worth $200 million a year. Like that's really cool. But when I think about that from my perspective as an experimentalist on I don't have Google search traffic volumes. I don't have these boatloads of statistical power. And so this doesn't make me feel like experimentation is accessible. And so I think it actually does those telling those stories actually does a disservice to our industry. So I feel like people don't forget to they forget that statistical power depends on two things. It's the number of users you have, but also the effect size you're looking for. And the effect size is actually the much more important factor. And I think in practice, we find that a lot of startups can get away with like measuring double-digit percentage changes, like 20% on just like 10,000 users. So you don't need the millions. You just need to be testing things that have important, impactful changes. And I think I would make the argument that if you're a startup, you shouldn't be micro optimizing 0.1% click-through rates. You need to be looking for the 10, 20% wins. Um, and so that means like you should be using experimentation. It's definitely in your wheelhouse.
Yeah. Alon, anything you'd like to add there on like, obviously not everyone is a Google or a Meta. So what is your take on like whether is that something as too small to experiment?
Well, I actually totally agree with Tim. I think that, well, basically I get this question quite often, and I think that basically the question is somewhat wrong. Like people are anticipating for like a magic number that you need to have at least 2,000, at least 12,000, at least, I don't know, 50,000 users in each group. And that's not the right question. There is no magic number. The question is what effect, what is the effect do you want to be able to detect, or you're trying to in what pace you're trying to grow. And it really depends on the size of the company, the phase, if you're a startup or a public company. If you're a public company, improving your revenue by, I don't know, 0.5% or 10% is like really good news. And if you're an early stage startup, you need to grow like, I don't know, like twice every half a year, twice every year. Like you need to do exponential growth. So in many cases, the amount of users you have, or the potential effect that you are able to detect, somewhat in many cases it aligns with the size and that the effect that you are trying to aspire. And I totally agree with Tim that if you're a small startup, you don't want to try and be able to, I don't know, to optimize by 1%. You're trying to do a much bigger effect, and that's fine. There are some cases that you really want to be able to detect an effect, which is hard in the, I don't know, in a period of 3-4 weeks, maybe, or 6-5 weeks. And there are many, well, there are many advanced methodologies to shrink time, like Cupid, sequential testing, and so and so. But in general, in most cases, the effect you want to be able to detect really aligns with the amount of data that you have, like the stage that you are at a company.
Yeah. And I think, anecdotally, like if folks go to check Statsig's website for like our customer stories, you see a pretty broad range of uh, sizes when it comes to our customers. And like you can see sort of like the smaller startups, the kind of impacts they've had in terms of metric uplifts from running experiments versus say when you look at a case study from Notion, which has like, many more users, the the increases in things like activation rate or whatever metric they're driving, like you can sort of see that for folks who are interested. Um, and I think this is a nice segue into my next question because incidentally, Notion ran several experiments over, a year using holdouts to increase their activation rate by something like 6% by running like, hundreds of experiments over time. The next question is on the topic of holdouts. So Tim, can you maybe explain first what they are and I think people are also interested to know, do these really work? And what are the trade-offs that people need to think about when they use holdouts?
Yeah, I think there's a decent amount of controversy around holdouts. I can just share from my experience. So a holdout is when you take a small percentage of users and you withhold a feature or a set of features from them for a longer period of time. Um, this is this is pretty powerful for a variety of reasons. Like for example, you can understand the cumulative effect. If you have many, many experiments and you maybe each of them are like a plus 1% increase to revenue, it's actually unclear if you have 20 of them, is that actually plus 20%? Do they actually multiply or do they cannibalize? Like it's unclear. And you also want to check for long-term effects. Like, are these lifts we're seeing in these 4-week experiments actually going to stand up over 6 months? Holdouts are a great way to sort of release this feature to most of your users, but then you probably hold back 1 or 5% of your users who don't get it. So you're able to sort of monitor that as a long-term experiment. I'll say holdouts are very advanced and complicated. This is not where folks should start when they're experimenting. And you should never run a holdout just because you can. I find that's like a lot of people are like, "Ooh, I want to take it to the next level." Don't do it just because you can. You need to do it when you actually have a problem to solve because there's a lot of problems with running a holdout successfully. And these are like the 3 criteria I usually recommend folks make sure they establish before they get a holdout up and running. One is make sure you have leadership support. Um, if you don't have leadership support, you won't get engineering buy-in, and holdouts are actually a decent amount of burden for the engineering team because they have to maintain the 2 code paths for a long period of time. That's kind of like double the work for the engineering team, so it's costly. Uh, the second thing is that in order to get the leadership support, it must be answering a critical business question. So make sure you are addressing something that is top line and something your directors or VPs care about. And the third thing is make sure the holdouts always have high visibility. I used to have a rule that the holdout should be reported on every single month, even if it's mid-flight, just to remind people. And if folks were like, oh, this is not worth reporting on it, then I question whether you have leadership buy-in and I question whether you're actually answering something that's important. So those are the 3 criteria. But when done, these actually can be really powerful because you can measure the cumulative impact of multiple experiments. You can measure long-term effects. And a really good example is like from Facebook. I don't know how many folks remember in the early days, Facebook was a fast-growing social media network, but they had no way to make money. In fact, that was a constant question from all investors, like, how are you going to make money? And they didn't have an answer. Uh, and it wasn't until they figured out like we should put ads on the platform. And by the way, that wasn't obvious. It's obvious now looking back, but it wasn't obvious back then that ads was the answer because everyone thought, oh my God, you're gonna litter the thing with ads. Nobody's gonna want to use it. And they're all gonna quit the platform. So instead what Facebook did was, they could run an ads test for a short term and see like, yeah, we got more revenue and yeah, some users stopped using it, right? But I think there's a question over like long-term viability. And so they decided to have a long-term holdout where they withheld the ads from about 1% of users. I'll think about what 1% of users is for Facebook. Um, that's 1% of revenue, which today is over $1 billion. So this is a very expensive holdout. But it was very important because it helps Facebook understand the long-term impact of ads and quantifying what that exact trade-off is between revenue and engagement so they can optimize and tune it.
Yeah, I wish I'd created my account way back and was in that holdout group.
Yeah,
I
you just
thought
needed to create 100 accounts and you probably would have got in.
No, but interestingly, I think I recently listened to the Meta episode by Acquired, and they actually speak about how they noticed, I think, um, ads increased engagement on the platform just because of how well they were like built in to the newsfeed.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's after they got really sophisticated and good.
yeah,
In the early days, it definitely was not. But I think like the ads holdout's one way to really understand
yeah,
the long-term impact.
very cool. Loving these stories from you guys. I want to, I know we already have a ton of questions from the audience, so I want to, maybe quickly wrap things up. But Alon, did you have something to add there first?
No, no, not that much. I haven't done holdout with clients actually. It is I don't know complex and just haven't had the opportunity to do that.
Got it. So my last question before we, jump to the audience questions, because I know we already have like a ton that have come in. I want to just touch upon this idea of like the planning part and the analysis part of experiments, because sometimes you may have heard people say things like, significant results lower than the minimum detectable effect are not significant. So have you come across these types of things? And Alon, maybe you can share your perspectives first, and then we'll have Tim wrap things up.
Yeah, yeah, I got this question actually several times, even from seniors, senior people. Oh, well, just just say start by saying what is MD or the minimum detectable effect. Usually, when you plan a test, you want to make sure that you have enough statistical power that you will be able to detect. You have enough user to be able to detect some kind of effect. Usually, we talk about this effect in terms of the uplift or the lift, the positive lift in the KPI or the overall criterion, evaluation criterion that you are interested in. So let's say that you are interested in revenue, increasing the revenue. You want to set up an experiment where you are able to detect, for example, 8% lift in the revenue. Now, sometimes you could have an observed lift, which is lower than that 8%. This 8% was relevant for the planning phase. And you're not sure that if you see a significant result, but they are lower than the MD, you might think or suspect that the results are not significant because they are lower than the effect that you were planning. But the simple truth is that if results are significant, they are significant. And in general, I recommend not mixing planning and analysis when you do experimentation. So you set up this sample size using the MDE at the planning phase, and then the MDE, the minimum detectable effect, should not be involved in any way with the analysis. So there's no need to compare the observed lift in the experiment with the planned lift or the planned effect that you did while planning the test. And I think that the last comment maybe I'll say about it is that this is like a classic case of it's not a bug, it's a feature. So when you do power analysis, and I'm not going to get like really into these statistics, you actually, when you try to plan to be able to detect an 8% uplift in revenue, then actually part of the analysis makes sure that even if you'll have an observed lift, which is lower than that 8%, result will be significant. So it's not a mistake, it's not a bug, it's actually part of the design operation. So it really makes sense, and it's part of the game. I think that the last thing people need to understand is that MD is not the minimum required lift to be valid. It's a planning tool. It's not a threshold.
Got it. Um, Tim, any inputs
I
from
mean,
your end?
that was really well explained. I think you're right that people are confounding different things when they're worried about this. I don't have anything more to add other than I will share one of my favorite quotes on this topic. This is from a Ronnie Kohavi paper, but there was a statistician who's quoted this. Um, using uh, uh, sorry, using post-experimental MDE is analogous to giving the odds on a horse race after seeing the outcome. So it's like you can't really do that. Yeah.
I love it. That yeah, I just love hearing both of you like explain some of these concepts. Like even for someone like me, like I feel like it's explained so clearly that I even I understand it even though I'm not like a practitioner uh, as a data scientist. So yeah, really love these anecdotes and from both of you. Cool. So I know we have a ton of questions coming in, so maybe we'll just jump straight into, taking some of these questions from the audience. I've already started like picking uh picking some of these questions to like have you guys answer this. I also just want to let our audience know, like, we will hang around for the next 20 minutes or so, like going through all of these questions. But I've also created in our Slack community, which you can join by going to statsig.com/Slack. Um, and I can just drop that on the chat. I've created like an experimentation channel there that you can join. You can just search for this and join. And Alon and Tim will hang out there for the next few days to continue answering questions that they weren't able to get to in the webinar. Because I remember last time when we did this last month, we had, maybe 20 or 30 questions and we just couldn't get to them. And there were a lot of people who wanted to, engage with Alon and Tim. So what you need to do is go to statsig.com/Slack, which I've dropped on the chat, and then search for hashtag experimentation, and then just join that community, and you can continue like, if your questions are not answered in the next 20 minutes, you can continue discussing things with Alon and Tim over the rest of the week. So with that said and done, my first question, and I think Tim, maybe you can take this one because I know you've worked on this quite a bit. It's from Nick from Linktree, who asks, how do you know when an effect is a novelty effect? That is, it wanes after release. And I think that there were quite a few other people like Mateus who asked the same question on like, measuring long-term effects and novelty effects. So Tim, do you want to like, touch upon that? Because that seems to be a recurring theme.
Yeah. So probably the context is you've run, for example, a 4-week experiment. You see your results. You see some sort of lift to some metric that you're really interested in, and by the rules of experimentation, you should say like, okay, this is good, we're going to ship it. But do you really know that that effect will still be there next month or maybe a year from now? The answer is no, because you don't have that level of measurement. But you can get some clues from your experimental results on whether this result is durable. One thing I like to do is look at a view of um, what I call days since exposure. So essentially, if you look at every single user, and by the way, this is a feature built into the Static platform, but if you look at every single user online, their start date, and look at day 0, day 1, day 2, day 3, and look at how the metric progresses. A novelty effect looks like at the very early days, days 1 or 2, there's a big lift in the metrics engagement, but then over time, it will start to drop down. So day 14, day 20, like it starts to drop down. It may go down to 0, it may actually go negative. But I think for me, to understand whether the effect is durable, what I'd like to see is it will at least stay steady um, for some period of time, and then you can at least feel a little bit good that this effect looks like it's durable, and it's not just a lot of novelty effects usually disappear even after the first day. But if you've measured past a week, you should feel pretty confident that it's not a novelty effect.
Nice. Thank you for that question, Nick and Mateus. Next question is from Kashaf Jamshed, who asks, when running tests on your customers, do you run them in a small subset of production, or do you have a simulator that uses historic data? Is this I mean, I guess it's touching upon like just, running like maybe online and offline experiments, maybe. Uh, Alon or Tim, do either of you want to take that? Because I think that's an interesting question.
Well, I'm not sure I fully understood the question. So maybe team will take it, or you could try
Yeah,
to.
I don't know if I fully understand like what the purpose of the simulation is, but it is common to run when you're running an experiment to test it out on a small subset of users, and then once you feel like that's working well, whether you're testing that you've set up the experiment properly, or whether you're testing that this feature at least isn't like a glorious disaster, like that helps you get some confidence to roll it out to more users. Yeah.
Got it. Next question from Aviad Klein. The question is for a team that runs concurrent experiments, would you recommend to assess each experiment on its own, or would you recommend to check for interactions? Of course, we touched upon this at the start of the webinar, but I think the question also asks, if so, how, like linear regression or something else in terms of like the methodology for checking for interactions.
Who do you want?
Alon, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. Well, basically, we usually would recommend analyzing each test by itself. I think this would be like the best practice. And then you want to make sure that you don't have an interaction effect. If you do that, you really like if you are not using an automated tool like Statsig, if you want to do it by yourself, relatively hard, but still possible. You'll have to take the data that both experiments were live. So you don't want to take, I don't know, if one experiment start a week ago and the experiment start today, you want to take only the population from that's in both experiments. It means that you're going to have a smaller population to check the interaction effect, but you're not going to have any bias that is related to seasonality. Now, if you're doing, let's assume that you're doing only the simple A and B, so we don't have like big groups of like many variants in each experiment, then yes, you could do a linear regression with 0 for A and 1 for B. You could do, if you have more variant, then you could do 2A ANOVA, but it is more complex, harder to interpret. And so I would not like jump to do that. But you can also, like the last thing that you could do if you don't want to do like statistics and if you're not really sure about it, you could have like a square of all the combination AA, AB, BA, and BB. And to see with your eye, it's not like the best thing to do. It's not the best practice, but you could see if you see like, I don't know, a really big difference in terms of the uplift of the BB group compared to BA and BB. So let's say that each treatments is improving the KPI by 10%. You would want to see something like 20% uplift at the BB group. So I'm not sure if that was clear enough. If you do understand, it's something that could be relatively simple to do without using any statistics.
Got it. We have a ton of questions, so I'm just gonna like try to, get to as many as we can over the next 10 minutes. I like this question from Omri Levy, who asks, most companies are far from having the proper infrastructure for running A/B tests at scale. Um, do you have any tip from your experience on the keys to reducing the friction within that process of like scaling experimentation? Maybe like your favorite, tip or like key process to have in place. And maybe Tim, you can go first, and Alon, you can add um, something there.
Yeah, you need somebody that cares about the data. I think you need somebody that knows the value of experimentation and why running an experiment is providing useful information. If you don't have that, there's really no reason to proceed further. But once you have that, I think like it's very natural to get in the rhythm of like let's get one experiment running one after the other. Once you start to scale though, that's when you may want to start automating the process. I've seen some companies start building their own internal notebook tools. But I would argue and grant you I'm biased because I work for a experimentation platform vendor. Um, but today you can buy experimentation tools for fair that are very affordable, um, that work really well for scalability. And I think like a platform like Statsig is actually free for a lot of users if you stay under a certain volume of usage. So that's always worth like I think it's trivial to just pick up Statsig, try it out. If you don't like it, that's fine. If you like it, you may get a way of using it for free, or you just go to the lowest tier. It's pretty affordable in today's day and age, and I would not recommend anybody build their own experimentation platform unless they have a really specialized use case.
Yeah. Allon, anything to add to what Tim said?
Yeah, I just wanted to recommend Statsig, but you already kind of said that. I'll just say that like I make a living by helping companies build their own internal A/B testing platform, and it's really it makes sense. It's valid to do that. It's also really makes sense to buy it. Now I can say from my experience, it takes time to buy internal A/B testing platform. It could take years, lots of teams, costly. But if you really want to have your internal tool, if you want it to be like really designed to up to your needs, you could do that. But it's not fast. You're not going to do that fast. If you do buy, it will make everything much faster. And I'm saying that even though that I make a living by helping companies build their tool internally, I would just add that I think that if you are building it internally and you want to make it to lower the friction, you need to understand what is the bottleneck. So sometimes the bottleneck is the dev resource. So I know companies, for example, that they had like a big bottleneck and they built some kind of a no-code platform, like a UI to do experiments. Usually if you have a lean product with only landing pages, then you'll try to build some kind of an infrastructure that will help you create experiment without using any dev resources. But sometimes the bottleneck is the analyst. Then you want to automate the analysis or make the analysis much faster. Actually, I think that Statsig, you had a really nice and cool feature that you released lately, which you could upload a CSV and you get the analysis for free. So this is actually really amazing. You don't like, if you're an analyst and you want to be able to analyze really fast with the most advanced statistic capabilities, you just need to prepare the data correctly, and then you could upload your CSV, and then you can get like results. So
Yeah.
this could also, if that a bottleneck, you could do it much faster by using the free feature that Statsig has.
That's a good reminder. Yeah, that's Statsig Lite. If you have
I've just
you want to just upload it, you get you get all the numbers are crunched for you.
I just dropped it on the chat. So just upload your assignment and metric files, your CSV files, and we'll use Statsig Stats Engine to compute results. It just put it on the chat for those who want to try it out. Pretty cool way to, like, just quickly, if you run a test, you want to compare results with an existing tool. I dare say a legacy experimentation tool, but yeah, it's a pretty cool resource to just quickly check and see like what a modern experimentation platform looks like. Next question is from Kian Jiang, who asks, if you're just starting experimentation, how do you choose your evaluation metrics from scratch if you've just started it? Like, any tips on like picking the right, primary metrics, or any framework that you have, Tim, to think about that? And Allon, if you have anything to add as well.
I usually view metrics as a spectrum. There are metrics where that are directly going to be affected by the experiment. For example, if you change the color of a button, you can measure clicks. If you improve the page, if you improve the UI to make it more interesting, you expect users to stay longer on the page. This is like very direct, like the first thing that should happen. But usually those metrics are not the ones that your business cares about. And so you go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, and this is stuff your CEO cares about. This is like revenue. This is how many users we have. This is how much retention or time spent. And somewhere every single metric is on the spectrum, and usually you want to do a smattering of, you want to have the operational metrics so you know your experiment is at least doing the first order effect, but you want to see if you can get some sort of sense of the business metrics and whether those are being driven at all. And so I usually try to say, like, you should get a little bit of a spectrum of a set of metrics that you think are reasonably connected to the change that you're making.
Nice. Allon, any tip from your side, or do we go to the next question?
Well, I think the teams like really frame it correctly. I think that everyone wants to be able to measure revenue or to see how you affect the business retention or any other business KPIs that the organization has in high level, and you want to do your best, like to find the most closest thing to that metric without running for several months. So you want to be able to find the metric that you can be able to detect in between a week to 6 weeks.
Got it. Also, Tim and Alon, are you guys okay staying for another 5 minutes to finish up a couple more questions? I know we are like kind of at time with the webinar. Like, are you good with taking one or two more?
I'm good. It's the morning for me. Alon's the one who has to stay later.
I'm
I mean,
fine. I'm fine.
I know we have people from Singapore and India joining it. So thank you for taking the time to do this. I see a couple of really good questions that maybe we'll get to. And then I'll just point folks back to a Slack channel that I just created. Um, Go to statsig.com/Slack. I've dropped this on the chat. Search for hashtag experimentation. I already see about 10 people have joined. What I'll do is I'll put forward a couple of the unanswered questions at the end of the webinar, and folks can continue like dropping their questions there. And I will stand closely next to Tim's desk and have him answer them later today, and Alone as well. It's hard for me to like do that same level of intimidation, but like we'll have him as well answer these questions on Slack. So Gavin's question, I really like this one. Given that not all experiments will achieve statistically significant results, how do you measure the success of the experimentation program itself? How do you best measure the quality of an experiment independent of its results? I know we've shipped some features at Statsig recently around this. Tim, do you want to maybe just talk through that framework of what criteria we look at for quality, or just your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll just do like just high level of what I've
Yeah.
seen um other experimentation programs do because I work with a lot of companies that are trying to measure the quality. Number one is like, are folks actually setting up things with like a hypothesis and relevant metrics? Have they done a power analysis? Are they running the experiment for how long they thought they would run it? And then the last thing is, are they actually making a decision that is founded in the criteria they had set? I think those are like sort of the table stakes and things that you can objectively um, measure. There's probably a bunch of other ideas as well. Alon?
Well, I think that it's really hard to try to have a big percentage of winning tasks, for example. You shouldn't do that. But if you have the right hypothesis, you would expect that if you scale the number of experiments, you'll have a bigger number of tests with positive significant results. I think it's a bit tricky. Like I'm not 100% sure about it. I know that some companies at least used to give incentive for in salary for having a significant result, and I think uh, it could be really problematic. So you don't want to mess too much with the results. You want to make sure that you're doing the right hypothesis and that you're scaling the number of experiments. Yes. Oh, and I would say maybe one more thing. Um, and maybe that is only a problem in Israel. I'm not sure if it's in other countries as well, but you want to make sure that the high percentage of your experiments are aiming to improve and that are not non-inferiority. So you want to make sure that if they're not winning, that you are not releasing the features. So having, for an example, many iteration, I think it's a good sign for a healthy experimentation culture. So, for example, you fail at the first time with experiment, and then you try to do a second iteration. That could be a really good sign that um, um, you are data driven. Your decisions are data driven because you are taking seriously what the data is telling you, the results are telling you.
Got it. Good, nice anecdotes there. Let's just take one final question, and then, Tim and Alon, if you see any, I know there are quite a few open questions on the Q&A as well as, stuff on the chat. If there's any question that you really want to answer, we should do that. Um, so let me give you like the final question, and then you can like decide if you want to take anything else. So this question from Juan Do kind of touches on what you spoke earlier about like the engineering resource blockers, I guess. So the question is, what alternative ways to test when developers say they cannot create two versions of code? Is that something you've seen happen where there's just like maybe like a blocker from an engineering side to run a test?
There are probably some like legitimate reasons why you cannot. I mean, software developers are always creating new versions of code. That is what they do. But there's probably some technical challenges on sometimes being able to run two versions simultaneously. For example, if you have a large backend system that's doing a machine learning ranking, if you wanted to have two versions of that, that means spinning up a second system. And so like I understand the technical challenges, but in general, it should be pretty easy for most developers to be able to like, because that is what they do. They're creating new code all the time. The difference is how do you deliver those two experiences in a reliable and dependable fashion that adhere to the rules of A/B testing. And that is where you want a really good feature flagging service, or you want to have some sort of code that is doing something like a hash of the user ID, for example, to be able to assign users. StatSig makes this pretty easy. We have our tools out of the box that can do this, but this is sort of table stakes. A lot of platforms out there and feature flagging tools can do this today.
Got it. Um, I guess we definitely won't be able to get to the remaining questions. There are quite a few unanswered ones. So I'll start putting them on the Slack channel. So folks, one final reminder, you can go to statsig.com/Slack, search for hashtag experimentation. Already added Allon and Tim there, and I see at least another 7 or 8 people have joined already. So, we can continue this discussion there for the rest of the week. I will do my best to cover all the questions that have gone unanswered so that, if you join the Slack community, you'll see responses to that. I guess my final question that I have to ask him is like, how do I pronounce what's written on your t-shirt? Like one final hot
Um,
take, maybe.
I grew up as a Star Trek fan, so I prefer the Patrick Stewart pronunciation, which is data.
Data. Got it. Tim is the head of data at Statsig. What do you think, Alon? Do you have a different version?
No, I'm not the right person to say which version is best. I'll go with data too.
Nice. Um, well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I think this was a really productive conversation. Thank you for staying over. We were scheduled to wrap up by 9:45, but it's great to see all of you still, hanging out um, on the Zoom link. So I will, at the end of this webinar, just collate the questions that we weren't able to get to and post them on Slack. So join that channel, and you can bring more questions over the course of the week. Alon and Tim will be there to answer your questions. Any final thoughts, Tim and Alon, before we wrap up?
No, this was fun. Thanks everyone for attending. I really appreciate. I love seeing all the attendance here.
Thank you so much. Had a great time.
Yeah, great webinar. Thanks, guys. We'll do one again very soon. See ya.
Ciao. Bye.